Good day, ma'am, and to everyone. My report for today is all about the disadvantages of inclusive classroom, which has 4 topics. These are economical concerns, teacher training, teasing and ostracism, and behavioral concerns. What is inclusive classroom? An inclusive classroom is a term used in American pedagogy to describe a classroom in which all students are accepted holistically regardless of their abilities or skills. It's based on the idea that being in a non-segregated classroom would help prepare special needs students for life after school. Now let's move on to the disadvantages of inclusive classroom. Here are the list. Number 1. It forces students into a cookie-cutter model of learning. When we say cookie-cutter teaching approach, it means it is the same approach or style that is used within the classroom and not enough attention is paid to individual differences. An inclusion classroom works when there are enough resources available for teachers and staff to provide individualized learning processes for each student. The reality of modern-day funding for school districts is that if you place all kids into the same classroom settings, then the resources dedicated to special education go somewhere else. That means there will be times when some children are unable to mentally access the curriculum a teacher offers because they are forced into a cookie-cutter teaching approach. Without individualization, an inclusion classroom will struggle to find success. That means there must be a focus on accommodation that works for everyone. The second disadvantages of an inclusive classroom is that this structure can disrupt the learning environment for other students. Students with special needs often have advanced triggers which can lead to challenging behaviors and actions in the classroom. When they cause a disruption, then it makes it more difficult for the other students to stay focused on the curriculum. If there are multiple interruptions every day, then their learning processes are slowed despite the emphasis on diversity within the school environment. That means teachers must move more slowly through the information to ensure that every student can stay caught up with the curriculum. If a student is highly capable of pursuing work that is more challenging, then they must be held back or separated from the classroom to accomplish those goals, which limits diversity in the opposite direction. The third disadvantages of inclusive classroom is that some physical disabilities require a special classroom configuration. No one is denying the fact that diversity can make us better as a human race. When we see life through a different perspective, then it becomes possible to increase our knowledge and deepen our empathy for one another. There are some students, even if their only issue is a specific learning disability like a processing disorder, who could be severely affected by an inclusion classroom to the point where they are unable to stay caught up despite the presence of accommodations. When this situation is present in the classroom or a school district, then the only outcome which works is a specialized spot where their current educational needs can receive the attention it deserves. The fourth disadvantages of an inclusion classroom is that this process cannot be rushed if it is to be successful. Co-teaching environments can be beneficial to students in an inclusion classroom because it solves the problem of individualization. The only problem is that most school districts rush to put together their inclusion processes so that they can meet a specific administration goal, such as the presence of a specific percentage of inclusion for grant rewards or other monetary benefits. Students who are used to receiving a separate educational resource in a dedicated classroom can struggle to adapt to the general learning. Students who are used to receiving a separate educational resource in a dedicated classroom can struggle to adapt to the general learning environments that typically fall outside of the need of an IEP. They must receive a slow introduction to the changes about to occur so that they can be ready to meet the next challenges. The fifth disadvantages of inclusion classroom is that it can encourage some students to increase their acting out behaviors. Most students or kids want to find a way to feel normal with their peers. That means an identified disability or learning disorder becomes a weakness, which can open the doors to teasing and bullying. An inclusion classroom can provide many benefits, but it can also cause more behaviors to occur because kids who have a disability tend to do whatever they can do to hide this problem. One of the easiest ways to draw attention away from their learning struggles is to act out in the classroom. If something seems too difficult to manage, then a disruption of the class can settle the situation. That means students who would normally be in a separate room can experience significant anxiety levels because of a forced transition toward inclusion. Another disadvantages of inclusion classroom is that the students with special needs can often find themselves in a minor classroom role. Inclusion classrooms work when every student receives equal, individualized learning opportunities to further their education because there are 1 to 3 students in each class who might struggle with a disability or disorder. It is not unusual for them to be relegated to a minor role in the class community. Even the teachers who co-lead these situations can find themselves on the outside looking in as they attempt to provide the necessary accommodations that can help a student succeed. The seventh disadvantages of inclusion classroom is it can lead to more absences in the student population. In looking at a nationally representative sample of students, notes Education Week in a 2016 piece, researchers have found that the young children who shared a classroom with pupils who have behavioral and emotional disabilities and more absences, lower reading scores, and lower math scores. The research also notes that kids in kindergarten or first grade who were in an inclusion classroom were more likely to act out in class and have problems with their social skills. Inclusion can boost the math scores of students with learning or emotional disabilities without placing an academic drag on other kids, but this benefit occurs for those who are in the same grade, not necessarily in the same classroom. The 8 disadvantages of inclusion classroom impact minority students the most. Jason Fletcher, a professor of public affairs at the University of Wisconsin, looked at the spillover effects of an inclusion classroom on students without a disability. He discovered that students who came from a Hispanic or African American household in low-income schools had profound struggles with their reading under this structure. The score gaps between white students and minorities were also larger in the classroom with students who had behavioral or emotional disabilities than they were in areas where those with special needs were given an alternative learning environment. The last on the list of the disadvantages of inclusion classroom is it forces the teachers to have a practical understanding of each disability. Stacy Campbell is a general education kindergarten teacher in Washington, D.C. Education Week spoke to her in 2016 about the pros and cons of inclusion classrooms, and her feedback was straightforward. A lot of times, the specialists who come in are only worried about that one child. But as a general education teacher, I need to worry about that child and every other student, she said. I saw my other students quickly pick up or emulate the disruptive behaviors. If they got hit, they were going to hit back. Without this teacher preparation in special education programs and a practical understanding of what each disability requires as a response, it is an almost as impossible task for an inclusion classroom to be a safe environment for all learning needs because there is a lack of knowledge in the processes. Economical concerns. In economical concerns, children with disabilities often require extra adults in the room. During tough economic times when cutbacks in government budgets are hitting the educational and other sectors hard, the monies for this extra staffing may simply not be there. It may be very well outside of the budget to hire paraprofessionals trained to attend to these children's lacking behavioral or learning needs. Many times, children with disabilities need special equipment. For example, in the case of a blind or severely visually impaired child, school districts may not be able to afford braillers or talking tapes that aid children in reading. Teacher training. In teacher training or lack thereof can become an issue. According to the article Integration of Disabled Students into the Modern Classroom from the University of Florida School of Music website, a teacher may lack of training or may lack the training to address problems that children with disabilities bring to the classroom. The teacher who is responsible for the education of all her students or his students may not have the necessary specialized training to address the needs of students with special needs. He or she may not be capable of managing her classroom or his classroom time so that he or she gives the special needs students the time they need to succeed academically while managing his or her time with his or her other pupils as well. Teasing and ostracism. When we say ostracism, it is the act of ignoring. It refers to the excluding individuals. It is differentiated from social exclusion in that ostracism generally requires ignoring or lack of attention in addition to social exclusion. It is distinguishable from overt act of rejection and bullying because rather than combining acts of inclusion with verbal or physical abuse, ostracism involves giving no or little attention to the individual or groups. Mainstream classrooms may not be an appropriate fit for the students with disabilities because the other children may not know how to deal well with their differences. They may resort to ridiculing or outright ostracism, as the University of Florida article says, of a child whom they perceive is not like them. They may laugh because the child has a speech or breathing impediment that is audible when the teacher calls on the child to read. That the student may find himself in a situation where he or she is always the final choice for teams for games in physical education class. Lastly, the behavioral concerns. In behavioral concerns, depending on the nature of a child's disability, it can affect the way that student behaves. According to the ERIC article, that pupils' misbehavior and disrespect can be so intense that disrupts the learning environment. It can also be frustrating for the teacher attempting to teach in such an environment, as a result of the adults having to control the child's behavior. Mainstream population children can lose out on valuable classroom time. Overall, we should know all about the disadvantages of an inclusion classrooms because these are very important in the near future as we become a teacher. To be aware and well prepared. We can use these to help students with or without disabilities to engage physically, academically, participate, boost their confidence, whether the issues involve a learning disorder, a physical disability, or emotional and mental challenges. This tool is a way that helps everyone have access to more paths that can lead towards success. That's the end of my report. That would be all, ma'am. Thank you and have a good day.